My name is Matt Mason. I'm the Nebraska State Poet currently, and I was born and raised in Omaha. Moved away for college and was kind of in and out of the state for about 10 years, or bouncing between California and Iowa and North Dakota, and then have been back here in Nebraska since '96, and probably be here forever. I went for undergrad to Santa Clara University in California in the South Bay, and eventually came back to California for graduate school, where I went to UC Davis, majored in English at Santa Clara, and then got an MA in English at UC Davis. I started writing poetry when I was in high school as an odd thing, because I wasn't connecting with poetry. I didn't think I liked poetry when I was in high school, but started writing it mainly just because at least what I could see about poetry is that the format of poetry was really a good way to write things down for me. And so I started writing poetry just to kind of figure out the world around me, talk about, I was a teenager, talk about why I was sad that week, or about the girl who wouldn't call me back, or something like that. So. What I found through poetry is that poetry is a great way to figure out the world around me and the things going on in my life. Helped me figure out, the emotions I'm having, that I think I was kind of stereotypically male in not really understanding my emotions very well, but by sitting down to write about the things in my life, I figure out myself a little bit better. I figure out the world at large a little bit better. So poetry has been, both wonderfully creative and enjoyable to do. I love doing it, but it's also, to a certain extent therapeutic, and to a certain extent, I guess, it's like scientific in just figuring things out. The topics I write about just come from anything around me. Especially as a parent, there are a lot of weird things that happen in a day. And realistically, I think, in anyone's given day, there's 5, 6, 7 times where something makes you physically react to something that has happened. Either something beautiful you see in the trees that makes you take a double take, or something you read in the papers that just makes you go, ah. These things that make you physically react, we'll forget them 10 minutes later, but if we're looking for something to write about, it could end up being a poem. So there's a lot of that in the things my friends say, in national news that comes up, or just something that I think makes me laugh, who knows. In putting books together for me, I'm kind of lucky in that I've got a lot of poems. I've got a lot of bad poems, but fortunately some good ones. Since 1990, I've made myself write a poem every week, which means, some weeks I'll write more than one, but usually it's about, 60, 65 poems a year. So that's a lot of poems. And figuring out which ones are good or maybe good enough to be considered for a book. Like my first book was mainly the poems I'd had, put a stack of most of the poems I'd had picked up by magazines here and there, as well as some other ones that I thought were interesting, and just tried to see if I could find an order for them where they all fit together. And some poems got weeded out in that process, but I think I got a good manuscript together. And since then, I've got a lot of different poems on different subjects, and kind of sort them into piles that these vaguely go together, or these specifically go together. Some of them, like the Disneyland manuscript, I've been writing poem by poem, just concentrating on that. But others, like my second book, The Baby That Ate Cincinnati, was just a collection of poems written over about 10 years about being a dad. That's all I found the right ones that work together, and an order for them. As state poet, it's still a little odd for me, because because most of my time in Nebraska as an adult has been with Bill Clefcorn as the state poet, who is an irreplaceable figurehead of poetry to me. So it's still like some days I see, we'll see something about, oh, Matt Mason, state poet. It's like, holy cow, I'm state poet. It's still kind of a surprise because it's not something I can say I really expected to happen. But it's been fantastic. I love the work of state poet. I love going around the state to different communities, doing readings, just having discussions about poetry with people. It's kind of what I love doing. And so being the state poet has been, I'm unbelievably grateful to be in this work. With my poems, I kind of work for a voice that I hear in my head as I write it. My first drafts are written down silently, but then I'm reading them out loud to make sure I have the rhythm right and the voice sounds like the voice I heard in my head as I was writing things down. And that voice is kind of like a little bit smarter than me, just slightly my personality, but a little bit more extroverted, probably a little bit wittier. It's kind of like tapping that unconscious part of our brain that kind of does most of the work and comes up with dreams and all these wild things, which I really think that part of my brain is smarter than my conscious brain. So being able to incorporate a little of the unconscious brain in what seems like it's just coming off the top of my head, that's kind of fun to play with. And so it ends up being a person who's mostly like me, but just a little bit different. So not straight on, just like kind of over here maybe. If you're starting with writing, that's fantastic. Write for yourself. Write to what you wish poetry had more of in the world. That's one thing I tell writers. It's one thing I discovered. It's not just writing poems that I think poetry is supposed to be like, but or based on what I've studied, or it's like, oh, I need to write more like T.S. Eliot or something like that. It's like, no, well, when you read poetry, what is missing from it? What do you wish more poets were writing about? What subjects, what themes? And write those poems. Don't wait for somebody else to fill the gap you see in this art form. See what you can do. And then when you've got poems, try them on your friends, send some to magazines, see if don't worry about them getting rejected, because 95% or more of poems sent to magazines will come back to you. Even as state poet, I send poems out, they come back to me. So it's, find kind of a way in your head of thinking that what you're doing is benefiting your life, and that's kind of the main thing. Because for my poetry, I write mostly to just process the world around me, process my family, process my daughters, process politics, and it's important for me to do this writing, whether I get published, whether I'm state poet or not. I would be writing even without any of the successes I've had, just because it's good for me. It feels good. I really enjoy it. So, hopefully you can carry that with you.
I'm Stacy Wait. I'm a poet and scholar. I work at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, as an associate professor in the English department. And I was born and raised on Long Island in New York. I went to graduate school at the University of Pittsburgh, and then I moved here to Nebraska in 2011. And I've been here the last, I guess this would be year 9. I started writing poetry when I was really young. Pretty much as soon as I learned to rhyme, I started writing poems, little poems. I would make greeting cards for everyone in my family for Christmas. I write little poems about them and So from the time I was little, I just really liked words and playing with words and that sort of thing. And then in junior high and stuff, when things got kind of rough, you know, I had my notebooks where I write my poems and stuff. But then when I got to high school, started reading the kind of poetry that they teach in high schools, I was like, oh, maybe I'm not a poet, you know, because it was just, I mean, T.S. Eliot just didn't sound like me, so I didn't know, you know, exactly. I was like, maybe it's not poetry, I don't know what I'm doing. And then when I got to college, I went to my first poetry reading, and a friend of mine said, you want to go to this poetry reading? I didn't know what that was. I go like, what do you mean, like we go there and somebody's going to read Shakespeare? And I'm like, no, like a poet's coming to campus and they're going to read their poems. I'm like that they wrote on a live person? You know, like I was just like, what? And so I, you know, went to my first poetry reading and was like, wow, this is awesome, you know, and I didn't know that poet was like a legit life plan. I mean, in some ways it's not, because you know it's not going to pay the bills, but it was cool to see like living poets, and I think we don't expose kids to enough living poets. The books sort of happen like kind of by accident, you know. At least for me anyway. Like I get obsessed with something. And then for a couple of years, sometimes 5 years, I write about that thing or return to it. And then eventually I start to like think like, maybe there's a book in all this. And usually it gets to a point where I physically print out everything I have and I put it on the floor and I go like, well, let's see. And sometimes the answer is like, nope, there's no book here, unfortunately. There's 3, and so you're only a third of the way done with 3 books. And then sometimes you get that pile and you're like, now this. And then once I have that pile of drafted poems, then it's time to like try to work on them and shape them as a book and order them. And then sometimes you're like, maybe this is a book, but there are some poems missing from it. You know, I need to write these poems. And so it usually comes together. I mean, so far anyway, that's how all the books have come together for me. I mean, I would describe my work as extremely vulnerable, yeah. I mean, I think the reason I write to begin with, or that I wrote especially starting in sort of junior high, was a way of kind of coping with feeling sort of like there's this thing about the world that everyone else seems to like understand and think is like completely natural and normal, gender, and that I was just like, none of this makes sense. Does anyone else think this is weird? Why don't people just pee? Why do we go in 2 separate rooms to pee? There's stalls. Like, why are there boys teams and why do we stand in girls lines and boys lines in kindergarten? Like, just stand in a line. Like, it's just, the whole thing was like, from the time I was a little kid, it was just very confusing and frustrating for me in this way that I didn't really have anyone else to make sense of it with. And so I started writing stories, poems, and I think some of us, in order to survive, we imagine the world other than it is, and then we write, you know, towards that instead of in this. Again, I think it's a thing that other people sort of take for granted every day, and I feel like I have a sort of unique perspective on what it really looks like from the outside, sort of looking into it. It's kind of like an alien coming down to a new planet and being like, what is this? What do you do here? Why do you eat that? What do you know, like you know, I often feel that way. There's a poem in Butch Geography, my 2013 collection, that I talk about feeling like a sort of tourist in a gendered village where it's like, you know, people are explaining to me how it works and I'm like, you know. So I just feel like because of that perspective, I just notice things that other people might not notice. And if I think more broadly, I think poets, that's our job. It's our job to point people to notice things they wouldn't otherwise notice. So that includes a nature poet who's being like, you're not seeing this tree, let me help you see it. You know, like I think all the poets I love anyway, that's what they're trying to do, is saying like, hey, there's these things that you take for granted and you don't see them and you don't notice them, and I want to point them out. For me, I mean, all I try to do with voice is, I think my poetry is the place in my life that I'm maybe the most honest, where it's just like me and my notebook, and like I'm just able to be the most honest version of myself in those moments in a way that sometimes it's just too hard. Yeah. There's a way that I, at least at a certain point in the drafting process, that I have to erase the idea of an audience in order to get to that honest place. Because if you start thinking about different groups of people or individual people that might read the poems or whatever. Like if you're writing a poem about your mom and you're trying to see her as clearly and honestly as you can't think about your mom reading the poem, so there's this way that at first there's kind of this, I create this sort of insulation that it's just about, this is just me trying to see myself and the world clearly, and to report honestly back from what I see. And then once I have a poem drafted, sometimes I begin to think about various audiences and wanting the poem to be understood. For example, that a queer person can sort of connect with the poem, but then also that someone who maybe has experienced a lot of normativity in their gender and sexuality could also have a way of connecting with the work. Because I'm not going to change anything about the sort of normativity of gender or sexuality if the people that experience that normativity don't change their mind. If only those of us who don't experience it are constantly, frustrated, but it's like we have to find a way to be heard. And like I said, it could be the smallest thing, just hoping that, somebody will hear a poem and like maybe not say a thing a certain way to their kid, or maybe not say a thing if they're a teacher, like to a kid in their classroom, like that maybe before they thought was normal or innocuous, and then being like, actually, maybe not, And so, for me, that's, of course, there's a world where you'd like to see big changes, but sometimes as a poet, I just think sometimes the smallest thing can have this huge effect. What I say to the young people that I do work with is, don't let anyone tell you that the thing you love to do won't be of value. I think for me, that's a big, where people are like, but what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do? You're going to make money as a poet, and it's true that very few poets make money just as poets. Like, we're editors, we're, working for nonprofits, we're professors, we're teachers, sure, yeah, but that's not really the point, and I think that's how it's affected me, is that one thing I did have at certain crucial moments in my life was the encouragement to sort of, do the thing I love to do. And do the thing that helps me cope. And I, like I say to the young people, and I say to some of their parents, trust me, if you let them do what they love, they will make it of value. You don't know how, you can't anticipate how, but they will make it of value. Whereas if you tell a kid, we know you love poetry, but pharmaceuticals is where the money is right now, so that's what you should do. I just think that's a bad idea. And I know a lot of unhappy people. And one thing that's great about my life is all day I get to do two things I love to do, which is mentor and teach young people and write. Those are two things I love to do. So, it could not have worked out more perfectly for me to just keep at it and keep doing the thing that helped me survive and something that I love to do. So.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Jane Pope Geske Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors in Bennett Martin Public Library. I'm Diane Wilson. I'm curator of the collection here. And I wanted to let you know the Heritage Room, it has a unique status here in Lincoln City Libraries, as it's funded by an endowment that's supported by the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association. And that was established through the Foundation for Lincoln City Libraries. So through membership, programming, and fundraising efforts, the NLHA makes events like this possible. And I know there are some NLHA members here today, and I want to thank you for your support. So the mission of the Heritage Room is to preserve and promote literature by and about Nebraska authors. And one way we do that is by providing this John H. Ames reading series. And it's a venue for authors to share their books, which then enables our community of readers to learn about the great literary talent in our state. So today is the 220th event since our first program in 1985. This afternoon, we're pleased to host two influential Nebraska poets. And I'll introduce them briefly right now. Then they can read, and they'll take questions after both have finished. Matt Mason is the Nebraska State Poet, and he's Executive Director of the Nebraska Writers Collective. He helped bring the annual teen poetry festival called Louder Than a Bomb to Nebraska in 2011. And he also edits poetrymenu.com, which is a listing of every poetry event in the state. Matt is the author of 2 Nebraska Book Award-winning collections and a number of poetry chapbooks. And Stacy Wait is a poet, activist, educator, and scholar who is Associate Professor of English at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Waite has published 4 collections of poems, as well as scholarly books, and is a senior editor for Tupelo Quarterly, senior poetry editor. Waite's books are taught at over 70 colleges and universities in composition and rhetoric, creative writing, and also gender studies programs. So please welcome Matt Mason and Stacy Wait.
All right, thank you all. Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to read here. This is a fantastic room, and I love being in it. So I'm going to start with a few new poems. I think I've read here before, and it's videotaped, so you can see me reading from my other books. So why should I do that? I've got books. I like them. They're on the table if you want to thumb through or anything. But this is a poem I just wrote recently. I was out in western Nebraska, out where the highest point in Nebraska is, and they asked me if I could come up with some lines or something there. They would love to see a poem about it. So went out, and it was kind of a neat little place, took some notes, and then figured I'd write a poem later, and ended up like pulling out, and then all of a sudden like lines started going. It's like, damn it. And so just started taking notes in the car, and then it's like, oh, never mind, drove back up and just wrote for a while. So this is called Standing at the Highest Point. It's a subtle rise of farmland and cities, cows, bison, rivers, and hills. And here, if the whole state, if everyone turned this way on the clearest day, they would all see your face like a new Nebraska moon. You bumped along interstate, boulevard, gravel, dirt road to the top of your state. You now stand higher than that stone marker set on the precise pivot of a survey point. You luminary. You look out at the old tin windmill, face like a lion's, alone in a field. The one side, a row of smooth white turbines lined up to the other. And it's upright, smooth, how it's hard to decipher the way this state slopes up to you. Greenfield, pasture, no crags or high-rises, only one bluff, like the horizon has a chip in it, and still not as high up as you. As if Nebraska was made like a quilt, shaken out in the wind and set here, across sage and bright winter wheat. You lay back. Think about work left to do. But for now, take in a book, line by line, the sun making your face shine. This one's mine. Okay. I was like, there's only one bottle of water. I don't want Stacy to get Matt cooties. So, all right. It's an honor to read here with Stacy Wait, who's one of my favorite writers and favorite human beings on the planet. So if you haven't heard her read, you're going to love it. But I brought a poem that's kind of an honor to her and to UNL a little bit. I know grad students around the country in English, and sometimes programs are put together where they haze grad students for 2 years so that they can go off with an English degree and look for work. But here at UNL, I really like the process of a lot more care for the students than I see in a lot of programs. So this poem is called Watching Grad Students. And maybe you feel it applies to you. It's okay, even if you're at UNL. But they sit in nests of folders and planners and printouts and theory books and notebooks and books and books and books and books and books. They have been here since the sun came up, maybe before. Their eyes so filled with words, they are no longer white, now gray and pink. Whole worlds move fast motion around them as their fingers flip paper to paper to paper to laptop. At dusk, I click lamps on for them. They raise their mouths wide open to the ceiling. If they get tired of waiting, when they get tired of waiting, they check their email. 2 more local colleges hiring instructors. 1 class each. No benefits. All right, but like I said, instead of reading from my books, I figured I would read. I mean, I think on the drive here from Omaha, I changed what I was going to read about 5 times. So I think I'm going to read mostly the rest of these poems from a manuscript that I've been working on for the past couple of years about Disneyland, which is a manuscript that I kind of just became obsessed with Disneyland for no good reason, and really resisted the urge to do anything about it except I was reading books on Disneyland and watching listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, and then my wife is like, "You're doing all this Disneyland stuff. What are you writing about it?" It's like, I'm not. Just write about it. So what I thought, I was embarrassed. I thought it was stupid. And I still kind of do, but it's been a lot of fun. And so I'm almost done with a manuscript that I think has been just a blast. It ends up being about Disneyland and midlife, and memory really comes up more and more through it. So kind of more about the fallibility of it, but a lot more. So this is the first poem in the collection. It kind of sets it up about how it came to be. It's called Fast Pass to the Abyss. 1. This is a story about midlife crisis. This is a story without Ferraris or affairs or movie cliches. This is a story about Disneyland. As once upon a time, a man turned 49 and something changed. 2. You slip out of bed, 2 a.m., to obsess over airfare for every hole in your calendar these next 8 months. You did not used to do this. Your phone was not stuffed with podcasts named Mousetalgia. Connecting with Walt. Did you know Disney? And now, when your wife gets into the car with you, you change it to the radio quick, casual, air supply. Find yourself saying, "Oh yeah, can't get enough, I'm all out of love." Can you? Disneyland is 1,551 miles from your driveway. That's not so far, right? You turn 50 in August. Every thought did not used to be saturated with the happiest place on earth. Your head did not save so much space for Magic Kingdom trivia. You did not know the park opened in 1955 with a live broadcast Sugar Smiles masking a meltdown of fake tickets doubling the number of feet sinking in soft asphalt. Did not know nothing about the Hatbox Ghost or a Disney park in Shanghai. What you feel is a tremor in your fault lines, this impending decline, the quickening slack of this mortal slinky. You did not expect the form this reaper takes. Fast pass for Space Mountain in one hand, churro in the other. Mouse ears set on his cowl. He beckons with so warm a smile. Now, this is called At Some Age. At some age, you wake to discover you are now an old orphan with priorities unrecognizable from the versions you imagined were surely on their way. You find yourself chained to a small screen which won't stop ordering you around. Go to this meeting and answer these emails and pick up kids and unload the dishwasher and load it all again and handle this calendar notification ordering you to roll a rock to the top of that hill. Wi-Fi and electric dishwashers notwithstanding, this is not new. Though saying this does not soothe. You have a lovely life, but have misplaced its key. You retrace steps, try to remember where you last held it, scratch at your pockets, look everywhere. And this can't be the end of the poem. This is where there's supposed to be some grace note of hope that closes the poem tight with a soft bow of rhyme. One fun part with the manuscript is kind of looking at the geography of Disneyland. It's like you walk in and it's like you're going down Main Street, and then there's Tomorrowland, Fantasyland, Adventureland, or Frontierland, Adventureland, and other things past it. But I love the little places where the lands meet. There's not necessarily any big huzzah there, but it's just kind of neat to look at the borders of the different lands. And so I have a lot of the poems in the manuscript are about that. So this is one that's called At the Corner of Fantasy and Maine. You've got the castle's shadow, not the castle. Got mallards looking for a moat. Photographers with poses to pick from as horse-drawn streetcars clop by. You've got donuts, different every week. Sometimes a lemonade maple bar, sometimes pineapple and pink. At the place where lands transition from Photo Supply Co. to Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique. Where you're never quite sure the pinpoint, the borderline between where dust needs sweeping up and where it makes you fly. All you know is that somewhere nearby, someone always has the particular magic that turns $3 into coffee and a paper cup. And this poem, so part of the fun of the manuscript has been fun to put together, just learn weird things about myself and about life in general, I think. But it's also been fun to research because I've had to, go to Disneyland. So this poem is probably not the only poem ever written entirely on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, but it was kind of fun to just take a trip to see if you can write a poem. I'm assuming a lot of poems have been written on Small World. And I'm curious how many of them are unironic and how many of them are ironic and how many cuss words are in them. But anyway, so this poem is called Poem Review, composed on Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean. So you ride a boat through a New Orleans themed restaurant. Nobody barely looks up from their Monte Cristo sandwiches. Guy pulls at some banjo strings in sync with the crickets as your boat rolls past around a bend. A skull wearing a hat says something. But before you can gather what he's trying to tell you, the bottom drops to waterfall splash and robot skeletons, or are they droids? I forget the right name. Tell you all sorts of tales while telling you they don't tell tales, but that's a storyteller, I suppose. They tell you tales about not telling tales in their tales. Skeletons situated on Matterhorns of gold, relaxed in dusty beds, they tell more tales. They grow faces and shoot at you, at each other, at everything, as cannons steam and things like Davy Jones get dropped in conversation. You chug into a little town overrun by droids and Johnny Depps. But everyone seems to want the red-haired pirate woman more than Johnny Depp, except for the pirate who looks at his pig friends, the way we all wish Johnny Depp or a red-haired pirate woman would look at us. And there's up-tempo singing with a donkey and a dog, all while the town burns down, and there is shown an alarming lack of footwear. Here, the dog's the smart one. He's the one outside the cage. He's got the keys, waits for the best offer as the charred logs groan and the audio animatronic pie robots, that's what I think I'll call them, give a PSA on how too much rum has a real impact on your decision-making skills as Johnny Depp sings, and you get whiplashed by boat after boat, rear-ending, and a maritime escalator carries you back, yo-ho, to where it all starts again and again and again. Another part of in researching this, the Walt Disney Boyhood Museum. He spent part of his boyhood in Marceline, Missouri, which is about a 3-hour drive from here and or Omaha. So it was fun to go down there. So this poem I wrote there called The Story. The story is that it was an old cottonwood, finally knocked dead by a lightning bolt a few years ago, but in whose shade young Walt bloomed into an artist. His belly botany and storytelling, his ideas scratched with chalk, then brushed to dust, to start again and again. There in the unrushed peace of a kid, his back to the bark, as cardinals and crickets sang. And at the gift shop, you bought a chip of its wood, button-sized, and it reminds you of the thorn your mom held like treasure in a glass box on a tray. She bought it on a street in Turkey before you were born. The man told her it was a rarity, a relic from the crown of thorns. We buy thumbnails of miracle, pay for more than fragments, than diadems of atoms. We pay for the story to watch over us, to guide us, past cottonwood tops, past lightning, past gravity, past skies. And then one more poem is another one of those intersection border poems. This poem is called At the Corner of Fantasy and Tomorrow. There are turkey legs for sale. They're huge. You think you're that hungry. You're not, dude. This is the sort of decision you carry from land to land, from popcorn cart to churro stand. There's a reason the prince and princess are never shown grown fat. Someone types happily ever after and just leaves it at that. Oh. Thank you. And please clap as we bring up Stacy Wait.
Thanks, everyone. It's an absolute delight to read with my friend Matt Mason, who, when I moved here in 2011 and was I'm a New Yorker, so I was a little worried about it, you know. But this guy I was reading with in this bar in Pittsburgh, right before I left Pittsburgh, was like, "You're moving to Nebraska?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "You got to meet my friend Matt Mason." And everyone says that, you know, they got a friend somewhere. And you're like, "Yeah, whatever, I'll meet your friend." But that guy was right. Jim Kopic. Way to go, Jim Kopic. So I love me some Matt Mason. So I'm just going to read a few poems out of Butch Geography, which is here. And then, like Matt, I'm going to read from a new collection of poems that I've been working on the last couple of years after that. So, and I'm going to start off with a couple of more lighthearted poems because the new book is a little darker. Yikes. Okay, so. On the occasion of being mistaken for a boy by the umpire in the Little League Conference Championship, I had learned quickly how to spit through the jail-like bars of the catcher's mask, so looking back, I can't say as I blame the umpire, who after seeing me spit and punch my glove, could only draw one conclusion. "You got your cup on, right, son?"
And almost everyone hears him. And I want my father to stand up like he does and yell, "What the hell are you looking at, bub?" or "Bad call, Blue." But instead there's a hush. And I forget the signs for fastballs, curveballs, and screwballs, and all I can think about is no balls. No little 10-year-old balls to match my spit and mitt punching. My mother pretends to clean up orange peels, and the boys yell from the infield, "It's a girl! We got a girl as catcher!" He doesn't know what to say, so follows up his alrighty with a quick play ball. But I can't squat now. I think everyone is looking at my no balls. They're all watching the girl with no balls. I'm watching her too. She knows better than to cry, so spits again. She learns to live in halves, to, as her father says, save it for the field. She snaps, "What are you, blind ump?" and digs her plastic spikes into the fresh dirt. So, this is another poem from that series. I work a lot in series. I'll read to you from another series in the new book, so it's a thing I do. It's called "On the Occasion of Being Mistaken for the Delivery Boy by Two Members of the Girls' Youth Soccer League at the Marriott Hotel." I am at the door, pizza in hand, like Galileo with the globe. I can hear them giggling from behind the door, their footsteps pitter-pattering. It is probably their first time ordering the pizza alone. Tipping the driver will be a sweet new power for them. I feel the eye pressed against the proverbial peephole. "Pizza guy's here," she says, "and he is so cute." I pull my red Mama Angelina's hat over my eyes, which are far too feminine and blue and will give me away. And when the door swings open, I am at the gate of a new heaven. I am the cute delivery boy who, after he is spotted by concerned neighborhood fathers, is kept away from daughters such as these. They want me to join them, to pull up a badly upholstered chair to the table and share the pepperoni pie, radiating wet heat through its bottom like an engine. I stay for a glorious hour, tell stories about the band I never played in, tell them the guitar has just always come natural to me, I say. I am self-taught, I say. I can play anything you want to hear by ear. Shauna is the one of them I love. Her calves carved out like crescent moons as she props her Adidas sneakers atop the television which is blaring Prince's greatest hits on MTV. "Can you play guitar like him?" she asks. And I think on the question of Prince a moment. His small, erotic body, long hair falling around his shoulders like a black scarf. I lie again and say, I think Prince is a sissy. I never said I played this role well. The truth is, I made a bad delivery boy and felt shame fall over my body when Shauna pressed her mouth against my cheek and called me a hottie. And when she asked me where the band was playing next, I said Detroit. And when she asked me where I was headed from the hotel, I said back to work. The truth is, I played classical guitar on Sundays for my grandmother, who referred to me as her little Czechoslovakian princess. The truth is, I couldn't go back to work. The truth is, I couldn't go home again either. So I'll read one more poem from Butch Geography because whenever I read that poem, I have to read my apology to Prince poem right after it. I'll apologize, but I can't do this poem without singing. Just, it'll be all right. I mean, it'll be terrible, but you'll be all right. It's called Prince the Androgynous. When I listen to Prince, I feel bad about calling him a sissy. When I listen to Prince, it's impossible to think of anything but Prince. He's not the kind of person you can ignore. He just wants your extra time. He just wants you to act your age, mama, not your shoe size. And you can't say the guy doesn't have a recipe for relationship success. Prince the wise, Prince the androgynous, Prince the scarf beauty, Prince the revolution, Prince the purple rain, Prince the computer blue, Prince the homophobe, Prince the God, Prince the Jehovah's Witness, Prince the Seventh-day Adventist, Prince the little man syndrome, Prince the sage, Prince the guitar riff, Prince the boy girl, Prince the prince of pop. I tried on his moves at Wednesday night bowling alley karaoke. He would have been appalled, really, at my mullet, about my flippant attitude toward whether or not I could really sing, at how I made Little Red Corvette sound like a prepubescent country song, at me being in a bowling alley in the first place. Those were the days when people smoked in bowling alleys, the days when bowling alleys were not for families, the days when bowling alleys were full of idle men. They thought of me as one of them, cheered me on as I leaned into the mic. No prince, no royalty in sight. So the book I've been working on in the last couple of years, it's been a little heavier. So I'm going to read from that manuscript, and it's called A Real Man Would Have a Gun. It's the first poem in a collection called 1986. Papa Don't Preach hit the billboards. Our father said we couldn't listen to the song because of Madonna, because of pregnant teens in white dresses, but we listened anyway. Two rebellious girls, one of us less than half a girl, holding our hands over the boombox as if it were a gas stove for cold hands, waiting for the radio to play it so we could tape it. We hoped they'd play it before my father got home, before his keys jingled at the door like a chorus of rusted wind chimes. We were best friends and 9 and already tired of being told what to do, already grown stone sick of every cruel thing our fathers did to keep us from evil. We are about to find out that he's already home, already in the kitchen, mad about the music, mad about Lionel Richie and Billy Ocean and Prince and all the best pop stars 2 sunburned kids can imagine in New York in 1986. But Madonna is about to take him over the raging edge. I want to tell them to plug in the headphones and share them, to tape the song another day, to slip out the sliding glass doors and stay out long enough he'd forget what he heard. Long enough for his whiskey to take to doing what whiskey does. But the 2 9-year-olds, they love Madonna too much. They wouldn't hear me. They'd just hold their hands out above the tape deck. Wait for the opening notes of the song to arrive. Wait to be punished again for the things they love. So this book has been kind of, if my first book was kind of about gender, this book has more of a focus on masculinity as a thing that happens, thing that people do. And so I'm working on a series of poems. When you're me, you like get to be in all these settings where people think you're like one of them, you know, like boys think you're one of them, girls think you're one of them, you know. So I was working on this series, and I'll sort of read them, most of them. It's not all of them, but it's a series called Men Who Think I Am One of Them Speak. And the series is about just things that get said to me that I don't think get said in front of, let's do it like this, like actual women. I don't know what those are, but. So. That is not the one I'm going to start. Yep. So I'll kind of read these just all together. Men who think I am one of them speak. Check out that ass. When they say this, there is always in their voices a sense of urgency, like that ass is the edge of a cliff and they could die with one wrong step. My father checked out asses, thighs, any part of any woman, never any whole of any one. You are just like your father, is something distant relatives would say to explain why he and I couldn't get along. Both such charmers, both so stubborn. Check out that ass. Check out the way she, check out her, check out that man who thinks I am one of him, my father, my rootstock, what parts of me, rhizome underground, spreading the way this man who thinks I might be one of him tells me to check out that ass, and I am checked out. Men who think I am one of them speak. You're not going to write poems about your kids now, right? Says the famous man poet who I'm sure is only concerned about my career, just concerned the birth of my son will cause a sentimental softening, and these poems will be swallowed by some narrator who is someone's mother, even though my son does not call me mom. But the speaker of poems, he believes, cannot be the voice of someone's mother. Lines have to be crafted of some superior notion of form, precision, the lock-stop of a line, and who can possibly do that if their heart is half full of a child, even though my son, like all of us, is made of language, spoken into being. Poem or not, I will let my son live and ask him to be the kind of man whose heart is half full of something other than just his best work. Thank you. Men who think I am one of them speak. Yeah, but why is she bringing this up now? This one said twice, once about Christine Blasey Ford, once about the student whose instructor told her what she could do with her hands. Bringing this up now is not the right time to bring it up. Have to bring it up at just the right time, just not after it happens, or after you realize what it is, or after enough years that the men who think I am one of them have to think back to when they might have done a thing that should not be brought up now, because now is not the time to bring it up. Now is not truth time. These two men who said these two things do not think now is the right time. It's been too long. Even they can't remember if they've done anything that could be brought up now or ever. Men who think, go ahead, yeah, sorry. I'm just going to read one more of these. My wife predicts I'm going to get calls from a lot of my male friends being like, it was one of those about me? Like, did I say that? I'm just going to be like, I don't know, did you? I got two more of these, sorry. Two more. Men who think I am one of them speak, you know what I'm saying, right? Often said after the sexist thing, when they see my face is not doing the thing a man's face should do when his buddy says, she's a bitch, you know what I'm saying? She's a slut, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, she's smoking hot, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, she's abrasive, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, she's got no sense of humor, like, you know what I'm saying, right? Men who think I am one of them speak, dude, we are gonna have to fight them off with sticks. He is my friend and means that my daughter, just born, is beautiful. But it's him I want to punch in the face right now. Him I want to fight off with a stick, but he is my friend, of course, and means that my daughter, just born, is beautiful already, a temptress, a body to be checked out by some of the men who think I am one of them while she is defended by men of whom maybe I will be one, and we will fight them off with sticks, and my daughter will never be her own. Not here. Not like this. So I'm just going to read a few more poems from this collection. This is the title poem, and it's in 4 parts. And I wrote it when, by the way, that was a true story where this guy poet was like, after my son was born, was like, you're not going to write those poems about your kids now. And of course I was like, the whole book's going to be about my kids. Oh yeah. Like, I took it as a dare, you know what I mean? Like, so good for me. So anyway, this is one of the first poems that sort of became part of this collection, and it's about the first time after my son was born that my wife left town. He was probably about 2, for 4 days. And that was my first time alone with any small child ever. The 4 nights she's gone. 1. Some of you also might remember some of these events in Lincoln and how they were all together. 1. The news says 2 rapists escaped from the state penitentiary. Your friend's husband comes over for dinner. He teaches your son to jump the sprinkler in the yard. You drink gin on the back steps, talk like 2 men do. He eats spaghetti at your table, the light settling behind the trees. He stays when your son begs for a movie, and the 3 of you stretch out on the couch, the TV fervent with little penguins. Your son touches his beard. You do want him to spend the night, to stand watch at the door in shifts with you like soldiers. You talk yourself down. The rapist won't come here. You took 13 years of martial arts. You know how to kill a man. They might not even be rapists. You do not ask him to stay. You hear the helicopters overhead, their lights scanning the neighborhood. You scold yourself as you put your son to bed. What kind of man are you? Maybe your son does need a father if you are scared of a little town jailbreak. You sing to him the same song your mother sang to you. You wonder what song a real man would sing, or if the kind of man who guards the door would sing at all. 2. You find out an alligator has snatched a 2-year-old boy from a lagoon. They say his father fought the alligator for his boy. They say this time of year is nesting season for the alligator, guarding her young, protecting the perimeter of her 90 eggs until she hears a high pitch of noise which signals she should uncover the nest. You imagine yourself fighting the alligator, your fists bloody with a scrape of her claws, which they say are considered lucky for gamblers. You imagine you are able to kill the alligator, that your rage is too great, even for a 500-pound reptile mother. You close your eyes. You see yourself carrying your son from the water, the alligator floating at the edge, dead instead of your son, her young left to be born lost. This is what we do. Imagine our strength more holy, our rage more pure, our love some otherworldly force, impossible to contain, dangerous, and beyond measure. 3. The neighborhood too quiet, its breath sucked into summer heat, your son asleep too easily, doesn't even call you back, doesn't plea for one more song at the edge of his bed. You sit still in a kitchen chair, planted like a pushpin, staring into half-eaten dinner. You don't clean the dishes. You don't make his lunch. You don't write anything down. You sit perfectly still, like a child who thinks, if I don't move, then no one can see me. 4. You fall asleep on the couch, as you sometimes do when she's out of town. 2 a.m., the air conditioning quits on you, the neighbor's dog barking at its black back gate. You wake up sweating. You pull the steak knife from under the couch. You've been carrying it from room to room. You think to yourself, a real man would have a gun. And this night in Orlando, there's a real man with a real gun who has just begun shooting in a nightclub, on a dance floor, in a bathroom, presumably protecting whatever it is he sees fit to defend. But it turns out, in the end, not everything broken in him, in us, is worth saving. So I'll just read one more poem. I'll read two more poems, and then I'm gonna read this funny one at the end, just in case I made you too sad. So another thing I've been thinking a lot about since this masculinity book is sort of, even though this book is called Butch Geography, it was kind of about me, and I've been thinking more about like butch culture, as it were, as it was a thing and is a thing. I don't know, still at my house. I don't know if it's still a thing in bars anymore. Anyway, this poem is called When Butches Shoot Pool. Sometimes one of them goes overboard. Sometimes one of them gets drunk. Sometimes one of them starts a fight with a woman who looks like Tony Danza. Sometimes one of them sinks the cue ball. Sometimes one of them gives the other the last cigarette. Sometimes one of them becomes the other's father. Sometimes one of them holds the pool stick like a rifle. Sometimes one of them makes fun of the other's side spin. Sometimes one of them hits a 3-cushion bank shot. Sometimes one of them has the blue of the chalk on their fingertips or the blue of the blue chalk in their blue eyes. Sometimes one of them calls the other a sissy boy. Sometimes one of them plays a sexist song on the jukebox and calls their partner the wife. Sometimes one of them slaps the quarters down on the table like it's the very last pulsing left in their beating hearts. Sometimes one of them imagines their rage contained by the triangle, watches it crack open in the other's clean break. Sometimes one of them calls the shot by nodding their head in the direction of the intended pocket. Sometimes one of them is wearing the same cologne they wore in high school, but when the night is over, when they left the bar without yelling or fighting, when they've left the last bills for the bartender, when they've both spit on the city sidewalk, when they've reached the fast food parking lot down by the river, one of them would hold the other if they cried. Not that they cry, just if they did. This last one. Notes on Matt Damon. On RateMyProfessors.com, quite a few of my students suggest that my class is hard and that I look like Matt Damon. Some students have even granted me the infamous hot chili pepper rating for looking like him. It's hard to know how to interpret this. After all, Matt Damon is indeed handsome, and if my last words could be any words, those words just might be, do you like apples? Well, I got a number. How do you like them apples? To the middle school boys who bullied me. That's a quote from Good Will Hunting. Come on, people. I'm not from Boston, but the power of the accent does speak to me. I wonder what more Matt and I might have in common, other than our East Coast upbringing. After all, he was born on October 8th, a Libra, and I am a solid, on top of things, Capricorn. My parents divorced when I was 7, and young Matt was a whopping 13 when his parents untied the knot. I wonder, did he run into the woods in celebration? Did he dream of the day he'd actually stop seeing his father's leather shoes at the back door? Did he refuse to speak in school? Did he dress up in girls' clothes or pretend he was the lead singer of girl bands like Heart or Wilson Phillips or, even better, the Bangles? Did he want to work with his hands but find his hands inadequate? Did he want to be taller? Did he wander the halls of his middle school with notebooks full of love notes never slipped into the lockers of girls who thought of him as harmless or never thought of him at all? Did he ever eat an entire gallon of cookies and cream on prom night while the rest of the neighborhood danced in their beautiful genders? Did he major in English like all us poets do because he believes language precedes action? Did he ever listen to his mother crying through the walls of his Cambridge home? Did he like Latin when he learned Latin? Did he know when he was taking Latin that only kids that eventually go to Harvard, which he did, take Latin? Did he drop out of Harvard because he wanted to be a movie star? Or because the ivy walls seemed sinister? Or because he would have preferred to be the genius janitor, solving equations overnight, the unsung hero, the silent show-off, the handsome but underrated underdog? Did he love expensive gin? Is that why he married a bartender? Did he become a Red Sox fan the same way I became a Yankees fan? Because some inheritances we cannot turn down. Because our grandfather's opinions about Major League Baseball were more important than their opinions on racism, sexism, or war. Did he ever want to be a soldier? Did he know he'd grow up to gather white boy directors on HBO and combo mansplain, whitesplain racism to Effie Brown? Did he know what power and money and whiteness would make of him? Did he know what teeth masculinity sprouts in the mouth, what privilege he could not feel in the frightening woods of childhood? Did I know? Did I know the pain and danger of my failed girl skin was also the implicated safety of my white skin? Did I know the tangled web we weave, Matt Damon? With our white boy smiles and perceived objectivity, with our hot chili peppers and East Coast accents, I don't want to be you, Matt Damon. What can I do to stop being you? To be some other kind of man? The kind of man who, in the end, knows when to sit down, shut up, and listen. Thanks so much.
right. We're going to stay up here. What questions do you have?
The one I'm dying to ask is, why did a Nebraska boy pick Disneyland and not Disney World?
Because that's where I went when I was a kid with my parents. It all comes out in the book, the manuscript, because that's the question I asked myself for like more than a year. Though I've never been to Disney World, but it's like, why was this? But it's going as a kid with my parents when I was like 4, going when I was in college because I was out 5 hours away from Disneyland at the time, and then bringing my family there a few years ago. It's like these 3, like and another trip with friends at one point. But like these significant instances of going to this place that in time is kind of frozen. I mean, the rides change here and there, but mostly it's the same. And it's so it's for some reason I was just in my mind revisiting that. But you know, Florida too. Why? You know. Why? No.
I'm from New York. We didn't even know about Disneyland. Like, everybody just goes straight down to Florida.
It's not humid in Anaheim, so.
That's true. Question?
What else do you want to know? Yeah.
I'm curious, Matt, and to a certain extent you too, Stacy, about why you write about yourself in the second person. I find that really interesting. I mean, does it give you a little distance from yourself? Does it bring you closer to your audience? I'm just curious about that.
Oh. I mean, I usually don't, but for some reason the Disneyland manuscript had to be written as a you. It didn't seem right in first person as a way of being kind of inclusive of readers and audience, and also kind of playing a little bit of a game as like these experiences. What I find at the end, because as I wrote the poems one by one, they were in all different ways, and then it made sense to kind of solidify it as a you. It was just the right voice for the manuscript, really. And I think actually since then it's been hard to break that. So some of my newer poems are more about that. I think it brings a reader into the poem a little bit better sometimes. So it's not perfect every time, but I really think it's a way of kind of gathering people in a little bit better.
I mostly do it when I'm scared that I'm not going to tell the story in the honest way. Because if I speak from the I place, that's like, feels like me and all my shit, you know, like all my baggage, all my fears, all that. And when I speak in the you, there's enough distance for me to be like, this is this kid who is not me, even if it's me 3 years ago. It's like some version that I can see clearly and speak honestly and be like, and that's that person, you know. And so, yeah. So I would say that most of the time, that's what's going on with me. Fear is what's happening.
Stacey, as you were reading these poems about masculinity, it was actually very enjoyable to start to index all of the things that have happened in the world that might make a person want to write poetry about masculinity. The most recent presidential election and debates about gun control and this new spate of memoirs written by trans individuals that kind of push those things around too. Were all of those things driving forces, or was it sort of the birth of your son and that starts plasticizing?
I think it was initially the birth of my son, the sort of immense. I remember when we, you know, I don't even found out. I mean, my son is whoever he says he is, but you know, when we found out I was a boy or whatever, that I was like, holy shit, with the immense responsibility of like, I just kept saying to my wife, like, how do we make sure he's not an asshole? Like, there's just so like, and you know, some men are great. Obviously, some of them are my good friends. Some of my best friends are men, but at the same time, you know, men, like, they're not doing too well right now out there. And we're
just doing pretty well.
Yeah. So it was first this immense anxiety, but then when I started noticing the layer of my anxiety in my masculinity and how I was going to teach him to do masculinity right or something, as though there's like some way I could teach him to do it that's better, and then I started really thinking about myself, and then he was 2, and then the election happened, and I mean, it's all been sort of a perfect storm of like, yeah, we need to talk about this now, you know. So it was kind of like moving into this book was kind of how it happened. And the things, I mean, and that's why I said the you, like in that poem, in that 4 Nights She's Gone poem, like, I don't think I could say the sentence where I had the thought, like, you know, he needs a father. Because that's the cultural thought. You get that look from people, or in some cases we got that direct question from people, like, aren't you worried that he will not have, you know? And then, of course, my response not being like, you're an idiot who's subscribing to a bunch of idiocy, but my response being like, you don't think I can do it? Like, you don't think I can, right? It's just, it's craziness. It's craziness. And I wanted to implicate myself in that craziness as well as indict it. Hopefully I've done that. I don't know, my editor will tell me in a minute, because I just sent the manuscript, so it'll come back, and the editor will be like, you didn't do it, and then I'll have to try again.
That's awesome. Yeah.
When you visited Tomorrowland, was that a disappointment? Or
I mean, Tomorrowland, if you do think in the broader scope, Tomorrowland is a huge disappointment. Yeah, when it was made, I know too much. When Disneyland opened in 1955, it was modeled after 1986, the next return of Halley's Comet. So, you know, it's got 29 years in the future. And now you go, and there's a ride, Autopia, which was there when it opened, which is like these little putt-putt cars. It's awful. There's nothing futuristic about it. The futuristic stuff is more Star Wars, but it doesn't matter. It's still got Space Mountain, which is the greatest roller coaster in the world. So, yeah. But yeah, you do what they keep talking about. They're going to redo it someday, and they have to, but they have to re-envision it tomorrow. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Please watch for Stacy's book. I want to read it right now.
You can read it anytime you want.
Yes, I do. But fantastic. Yeah, so instead of you asking a question, I'm just going to say that I absolutely was amazed by those poems, and I think that's going to be an incredible book. So
thanks, man. I want to toot this guy's own horn, too, that this year, one of the things you should assign yourself to do, if you haven't done it already, is you should go see A Louder Than a Bomb Bout this spring, which is the youth program that Mac started in 2011-12.
And Stacy runs the Lincoln part.
And I run the Lincoln part. But if you haven't seen that program, when I found out Matt Mason was the Nebraska State poet, I was like, you know, of course, like, he brings poetry to, I mean, he made it cool for teenagers in Nebraska to like poetry. Like, okay? So you should come see that happen. It'll happen in the spring, so you should look out for it. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you very much.